You got 1 minute, we're just making sure everything works. I got feedback on something.
Yeah, it's on this one. You hear me talking? Okay, y'all talk and see what was here. Talking to your mic. There's the back. There we go. Who's online? Chris, Jack. Okay.
I'll just keep talking about it. I'll text Jack both. I'm sure he hears us.
Oh.
Keep talking. I'm fixing it.
Keep talking.
Mhm.
Give a chance to review the.
Yes.
And we're not gonna have a budget.
Okay, Chris says speak directly into the mic, so make sure you're eating it. Okay, let's start this.
Officially call the meeting to order. It is 4:02. I have here. Roll call. Chairperson Carla. Vice Chair John. Here. Here.
Here.
Commissioner Davenport.
Here.
All Commissioner Bledsoe.
Here.
All Commissioner Earl.
Here.
Thank you. So we have a quorum. All right, first item of business on our agenda.
Vice Chairperson, we're, alternate Commissioner Bledsoe will be the voting member. Since we're missing one.
Yeah.
There'll be 5.
Correct.
And Commissioner Evans, you can go ahead and be in this discussion. You just don't. Thank you. That's about it.
Okay, next on the order of business is pledges. The flags are not here, so we're going to skip that. There are no public comments, no one signed up to address the planning and zoning commission. So the first item on our agenda is approval of planning and zoning commission meeting from March 9th. Do I have a motion to accept?
Can I clarify the question?
Okay.
With the except, I'm not going to fight. I made a motion where it's second and then approved. And then at the part, yes, no vote on the main motion. I, but that seemed kind of fun, that they sort of skipped voting on the main motion.
There was no, it was, the only action was taken was on the amendment, but the chair did not call for a vote on Main motion.
by the mission or purpose.
I have no idea.
Should we bring it up at this meeting and it's not on the agenda? So we should have it next agenda.
Yeah, probably should, yes.
Okay. So we're gonna. Is that a friendly amendment to this?
Well,
How do we move forward?
just accept the minutes as read, and then we'll bring it back for action on that motion.
Okay. So, we have a motion to accept it.
I said,
Okay, second by Commissioner Hall. So, roll call. Vice Chair Jones. Aye. Commissioner Cunningham. Commissioner Bond.
yes.
Commissioner Davenport. Yes. Commissioner Leslie.
Yes.
Okay. So the second item is the approval of the minutes for April 1st, 2022. And that was the meeting where we did the rezone of the Brook Meadow. Yeah. I still have a motion to approve, a motion to approve these,
I'll make a motion to approve it.
okay?
Second.
Okay, motion was. And Commissioner Bledsoe,
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Conlon,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Jones. Aye. Moving on to our next item. All right, the first item on the regular agenda is to discuss and take appropriate action on the instructions from the city council of the city of Woodcreek to review, adjust, and/or create clear guidelines regarding plan unit development district, plan developmental district, conditional use permit, mixed use districts with a focus towards conservation, ETJ if applicable, and with possible benefits for our citizenry, and present to council their recommendations. Okay. We got several things in the packet to look at. Does everybody have a chance to look those up?
This is,
So we need a motion in order to discuss, so, does somebody have a motion that they would like to make?
This is not the total rental.
No, this is, all the other zoning districts that the council would like to have additional guidelines.
So are there any documents that were provided that talk about that?
No.
That are related to the short-term rental?
No, and what I was going to say is that, council, or Chairperson Katarba, asked, myself and Mr. Holmes to look this over, and we have not gotten, information to really review. So at this time, I would like for us to table this again, so that we can get information to look at.
we may want to add, from my discussion yesterday with the planning consultant, that he was going to supply us with some draft documents that they recently had worked on for another time. And that would be sort of foundational paperwork, and maybe we'll redline that from there on. But it probably be several weeks before we probably receive the review, it's like that. So,
I'm not sure I completely understand what the task is. I mean, it sounds to me what they're asking for is if you take, for example, the 2019 overlay, which this is derived from, which shows all the different zones. I don't know, it sounds to me like they're saying, hey man, let's review that, make sure we've got our city zone the way we want it zoned. And for the reasons that we want it zoned.
Well, my understanding though, you're raising your finger.
But basically what it is, if you look at the list of the, the different zoning districts, the PDD, the PUD, we don't have any guidelines like we do for SF1, SF2. It's just, you say there are those zoning districts. And they would like to have at least a clear set of guidelines. And when somebody comes in and wants to actually have a PDD, they have a blueprint to start, and that's it.
And we did have a developer come in with a PDD proposal. And we really didn't have anything other than, what's the name of the PDD that's over?
We actually have two, but the one that everyone knows about is Oak Orchard, better known as Tully Fork.
Yeah.
And one that's across the highway.
So basically what they're wanting us to do is come up with some of those guidelines for those ordinances. And I don't have a background for it, so I'm depending on a person to come across with, and we talked to Brandon yesterday, and he was gonna send a document to me.
And does this also tie in back at our April 1st meeting when we had, I forget his name, but he was the developer talking about I forget if it was the master plan or the community plan, where we're gonna basically make everything about our city. Is it tied into that?
I can say no and yes. On the comprehensive plan, everybody's working on that. And the comprehensive plan is basically the roadway or the map for the city into 2040. And you need a comprehensive plan that has something. And basically all this is just to say, okay, when you come in and you have a PDD that you want to apply for, these are the basic guidelines. And every one of these is a negotiated agreement with the developer. So, but they just want a clear set of guidelines to get started.
But is there any talk like our comprehensive plan potentially changing our zoning?
No.
No.
So we're gonna take our existing zoning.
And I think as we move through it, that it might be looked at to reduce the number of zones. I think we have like 20, which is for our city our size, that's a lot. Zoning.
So how would we get it?
Is there a second?
Hello.
Table it. Call roll. Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Hahn,
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it would probably be. All right,
Commissioner
all right,
Hunter,
thanks.
Commissioner Leslie.
Yes.
Okay. So the next item is appropriate action on the first draft of the short-term rental regulations and application document. Now, this is the first that we're seeing of this. I know that comprehensive plan, part of, and Laura may be able to talk to this a little bit, part of the discussion yesterday was, allowing it possibly for fiscal benefit.
Is that hotel tax? What is?
Well, okay, so let me tell you how this gets started. Okay, December 8th, 2021, city council meeting. The agenda item is discuss and take appropriate action on short-term rental ordinance violation of the site. The motion was made by Councilmember Hikes to direct city staff to work on the regulations and permit process for existing short-term rentals. It was seconded, and it was a unanimous vote. And what the map that I have in front of you, where this green area is SDR and SF4, and basically those are the cottages that are going down, and before you go down the dam, under the dam. That is the only zone in the city that allows short-term rentals. And so the action was to come up with guidelines for the existing short-term rental area, which is that one area.
Yes.
Do we need a motion to discuss?
Move to open it for discussion.
All right.
It is. So there are. Instead of spending time and effort coming up with 10-page regulations concerning something which really is a minor, if no issue at all, why can't we just go ahead and see if we can change the zoning ordinance, whatever it is, for these 6 little units here, so that all of Woodcreek would be denied any STR opportunities, as opposed to spending a lot of time on this right now.
Okay, so when you look at the code of ordinances and it says, single family 4, and in it, it says short-term rentals allowed. And that's the only place in our ordinances that we say the short-term rental is allowed. At the request of the city attorney, he felt like that we should have guidelines for that one area so that everyone knows that that is the short-term rental area.
As you know, there's an overwhelming opposition to any kind of short-term rentals in Woodcreek. So what would it take to change that ordinance? Can that be done?
The actual process would be to go ahead and have the recommendation to change it. And we would go through and have the 2 public hearings, have everybody send a notice to everybody within 200 foot of that area that that was going to be a change in that zoning, and have the 2 public hearings, goes to a vote of the planning and zoning for recommendation to the city council, and the city council makes the decision.
And that's what I would recommend to the PSC commissioners, that we recommend that avenue as opposed to trying to refine this draft, okay? Because as you said, none of them are being actively used as short-term rentals, so more than likely there would be no opposition to it, and then we have a clean slate.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to, state what the council's intent was, but the request was to come up with the guidelines and an application process. And that's what has been presented to this body to discuss.
Right. But the PSC can make a recommendation.
You
to
can
city
make,
council,
you can
right?
make the recommendation back to them and say, no,
The
we don't think you
guidelines-
need it.
The guidelines are tremendously simplified if there are no STRs.
Yeah,
And I think the thing is that we have short-term rentals that pop up in the community. And since we do have the one area, which is the SF4 area, that when somebody sees that, they think, well, and they go ahead and put one in that's illegal. And our city attorney, his opinion is by us having the guidelines, then people know that we allow short-term rentals in one area, no other area. And that's why we went ahead and drafted this actual guidelines and also the application process. So that when somebody comes in and we say, you can't have a short-term rental by you, and they're going, well, it doesn't say I can't. Well, no, it doesn't. But we do have the guidelines set up for the SF4 area.
Does this also tie into our first tasking, which is, hey man, look at all the zoning and come up with,
Mhm.
like, does this tie into that? Could we look at SF4 and say, okay, well, we're going to look at all the different zones and here's how we propose modifying them?
It could, yes.
anyone have any contra, discussion to this?
I mean, I'd like to be open. Other than the property owners
Mhm.
who may want to generate some revenue, is there a benefit to having STRs?
There is a slight revenue gain. We would be able to actually go back in and start charging the hotel motel tax again. But those regulations are so restricted because there's a certain percentage that has to go back into advertising and just promoting your community and supporting events in your community. When we had our hotel motel tax, it went to, we gave $1,000 to the rodeo because that brought people in. And what you have to think about is that hotel motel tax is to create heads in beds. I always get that mixed up. So you want tourists. But then you think about Woodcreek, our tourism base is everything that's outside of our area. We can charge the hotel motel tax in our ETJ. So it would benefit like the Lodge, Messina Inn, those areas, because we would be getting that tax from them. But we don't have that many things that are being promoted within Woodcreek right now. There could be. We could have somebody do a fundraiser or golf tournament out at the golf course and make it so people come in. A lot of times these funds are used for festivals and events. We could have a festival out here at the camp. And then that would generate money for the advertising and also help supplement part of the cost of it. Also, usually what happens is if you have a new event, then they get to apply for a lot larger amount of money, and it's reduced each year until they are self-sufficient. So you can use the money somewhere else.
I think we're missing the point here. The overwhelming majority of residents are against STRs. Why should we spend time and effort putting in regulations just to say that we have them? I would like to move along with my initial idea that we see if we can change the zoning ordinance or whatever it's called for these units here and do away with it. That would be my motion.
I tend to agree. I just want to make sure we're not missing anything. So it is, other than the onesies and twosies families who think it's a good idea to rent their house out, it doesn't seem like, I mean, certainly there's no one here standing up saying, we want short-term rentals.
And I think it goes back to, okay, we had 2 court cases. I'm not an attorney, okay? We got one in the hall here. So I'm not representing the legal side of this. Whatever the appeals court is in Austin, they upheld a regulation that helped STRs. And because what happened was the city of Austin went back and changed an ordinance that affected existing STRs. The city of Arlington actually went in and changed the ordinance and had these type of guidelines and stated, this is where you can have an STR, but this is where you cannot. And for the city of Arlington, what it was, their entertainment district allows STRs. Every other residential area outside in the city of Arlington does not, and specifically states it's not allowed in the application process and their guidelines.
Right, I get that. But SF4 is presumably within our ordinance is the only place that allows for
Yes.
STR.
Yes.
And to get to his point, I mean, it would certainly be simplifying it to put in the ordinance that none of the zones, whether it's residential or not, none of the zones within Woodcreek, unless, and I'm asking, I mean, is there some benefit? Does that somehow protect us, the city of Woodcreek, if we can say, well, no, hold on, someone's trying to sue us, and we're mitigating this by the fact that we do allow STRs right over there, but that's the only.
That's right.
Is that valid? Does that help us? Does that give us
It helps us that we have the guidelines there that says we allow STRs here. One of the arguments has been that if we do not state an STR is not allowed in SF1 or whatever zone it is, then everybody says, well, your lack of ability, your lack of not stating it in that says I can have it.
Sure, but it would be easier to just go through in each of these zones and say, no STRs allowed, no STRs allowed. No
But
STRs allowed.
then you open up, basically, then somebody might want to come in and say, I want to have a vape shop. It doesn't say you can't in the one zone. So it opens it up where people are that by the lack of stating it, then it is assumed that you can't have it. The state of Texas, for the city of Woodcreek, we cannot do anything unless the state states we can do it. If it doesn't state it, we can't do it. And that's how our ordinances are drafted.
But that's part of what our zoning is for. If we designate an area as single family residential, then the definition of that is I'm sure laid out somewhere.
It is.
And no one can come back and say, well, I want to open a vape shop there.
Well,
you
it'd
can't
be in
because
the
it's-
commercial zones that we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are year-round residences or owner-occupied things. So they're not active at this point in time,
No, I agree.
which further, you know,
There's no contracts.
Huh?
There's no contracts in place where people are paying. I mean,
No.
Right.
They're not
Right.
messing with anything.
Right. right.
And the STRs that we've had in court or the ones that we've had pop up in the city, it's just that our legal says you need to have a guideline there so that people see this is where it's allowed and that's it. And that way it's a lot easier to defend when we take them to court.
But is it not equally easy to defend if you have in our ordinance something that says they just plain are not allowed anywhere?
He does not believe so.
He does not believe that that's the case. He believes it would be better if we had one area where they are allowed.
Right. And with guidelines. Yes.
Before I moved to Woodcreek, I lived in Wimberley, and I had half a dozen short-term rentals which are owned and operated. So I'm very familiar with what Wimberley has, and they have very similar ordinances and documents like this one here, but they have several hundred of them, and so they are, with the hotel tax, generating hundreds of thousands a year, and we have a hard time determining how the money would be used. In our case, even if we allowed this, and even if these guys started renting it out, we would collect a couple of thousand a year. And in order to supervise and monitor that, we would be spending more money than that. So this is not a revenue generator, okay? That is not the case. And again, back to what I said before, I don't see why SF4 would be any different from 1, 2, and 3. And I would suggest that we try to change the ordinance. And if Brenton thinks we need to put it under every zoning area that no short-term rentals is allowed, we could do that as well, I guess. But I mean, right now, with a strong opinion against it here, for us to put in regulation is almost like it's actually encouraging additional shorter vacation rentals as opposed to the opposite. So I think PNC should send a clear recommendation to City Council that we table this issue until and unless we can get an ordinance changed the proper way, and we probably take several months to do that. But in the meantime, there's no harm made because nobody's being harmed by the way it is today.
Okay, so we have a motion to table.
Can I think about that for just a second? If we table it now, what's like, we want an endpoint. So we're waiting for additional information so that we can make an informed decision?
No, we are recommending that instead of dealing with this issue, we're going to focus on changing the ordinance to outlaw STRs in SF4. And only if that effort fails, will we come back to these documents here as I'm working on them.
Right, so, but that wouldn't be tabling this. The tasking is, hey, come up with something like this, right? And we're saying, we don't want to table that. We're saying, no, we're done with this. We're not going to come up with something like this. Instead, what we would like is to change the ordinance to say no STR.
Well, we probably can't go against City Council's order instructions to PNC to draft something like this. But if we table it, we just push it down, like politicians usually do, right? They push it down the hill or
What I
whatever.
see as being what we should do is table this item, and then I'll open it up for recommendation, to send a recommendation to City Council to review the ordinance at SF4.
I agree with you. I just want to make sure that if we're going to close this door, we're closing it fully. I don't want to leave it open and be like, oh, well, they never actually decided on that. They never actually voted on that. It's still kind of in there, but there may be some wiggle room. And second of all, to get some feedback from Bud or somebody, if there is, like, if it sounds like what Bud is saying maybe is that, hey, if we say it this way, then if someone over here or over here or over here pops up with a short-term rental, then we at least have a counter because we're able to say X, Y, Z. Now, I don't know if that's the case.
I don't either.
But if that strengthens the city's position on short-term rentals, if by coming up with one zone where we say, yeah, that's our short-term rental zone, I'm not proposing that, but if that somehow strengthens it for the rest of the city, then okay. I mean,
Yeah, and that was his recommendation. And that's why I went to the city council, and there was direction to come up with the draft consideration.
But if that is the case, that it shouldn't be complicated. It should say there's no short-term rentals anywhere except, right there where it's already allowed, or something like that. So.
Well, and in reading over this first draft, I will have to say, it goes very in depth with safety and signage, and it's really a good way to, which one is by the signage. There's a sticker on a window that says that they are compliant, that they are a short-term rental, that sort of thing. Again, to Mr. Palms, he, says, that's a lot of expense to go through for one little area. But I think that if we're going to allow it in SF4, we need this. If we're not going to allow it in SF4 and the ordinance gets changed, then we don't need this. But that doesn't mean this isn't coming back at us at some point.
Right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. The cleanest would be to not deal with any of this, just say short-term rentals aren't allowed. But I just want to make sure that that's what really is best. Like, if it would be nice to have Bud here to be able to explain, wait, why is it important for us to offer this even in one section?
I'd like to hear it from him as well.
Yeah.
Not just here, but he said something a year ago, but, and be able to answer some questions from us as well.
Yeah, because if there's not a reason, if it doesn't help, then I agree. Let's
But I still think we should move forward and try to change the ordinance for SF4 anyhow. Because it is the public opinion that we shouldn't have any STRs in Woodcreek. And I think we should follow what that majority of people are telling us, okay? No matter what our personal views may be. But I mean,
Once again, I'm not an attorney here, okay? But if you change the ordinance, the citizens that live there now and own those homes, they do not lose their rights.
Right.
If you change it and say you cannot have an SF4 or a short-term rental in this SF4 area, they do not lose their rights to go ahead and have an STR because they bought that house or they own that property allowing the STR.
Well, but you could say that same thing about the Brook Meadow overlay. Wait a minute, when I bought this 5-acre lot,
All it
You
takes
guys
is somebody to challenge.
you guys just changed the rules and said I can't. So,
You got it. It's true. Because they do have vested property rights. Just take somebody to sue us.
it doesn't mean you can't challenge it anyhow, I guess. But I mean, as you're saying, we changed with the overlay, we changed the property owners' rights, I guess, in Brook Meadow. And now you're saying that here we can't do that. Again, I'm not an attorney either, but I see a contradiction in that.
Well, basically, by doing the overlay, it's saying this is what we want. But there's been several instances in the Brook Meadow area where people have even gone back to when the city was not a city and said, we have property rights. Because when I purchased this area, it allowed duplexes, multifamily homes, and everything else. And they do have, and it just depends on how much they want to challenge the city. Because they can challenge us, because if they own that property when it was changed, they had that vested property right.
Unless they voluntarily give up that right.
If they don't want to challenge the city, that's okay.
And since every one of them is a permanent residence right now, there's a good chance that they all will say, okay, I'll sign off on that. I don't know the answer, but I mean, but that seems to be probable.
Do you know who drafted this?
I did.
You did.
And then the second one that was drafted by then Councilmember LeBron and Jackson, the one on the second one.
Second one.
This is actually the one I drafted came from New Braunfels and another city in another state. And that's why a lot of the life safety stuff is in there, because a lot of the cities are going toward the requirements like a hotel or motel for the life safety, because it's a lot harder to meet those requirements
In a
That-
residential home.
in a residential home. Because one of the requirements is in there right now, you have to have a sprinkler system, just like in a hotel.
Okay.
Parson, do you want to weigh in?
I think it's kind of two separate things. We have STRs right now, technically, so we need guidelines. If you want to get rid of them, get rid of the STRs for SS4. So it's they're separate issues almost. So kind of how I see it.
Brenton, I agree with you. When I was reading through this though, I guess I got a little bit confused. Right up front, you define residential district and you say residential district means SF 1, 2, 3, 5, 6.
Right.
And then I'm not completely sure what it means after that. It says includes all subsequently approved special districts identified as non-residential. What does that mean?
Well, that would be like our,
The lodge?
it'd be actually like our commercial areas, things like that.
Okay. But if you look then on our existing 2019 map,
Mhm.
if this goes on to say, and I believe the intent of this is to say STRs are not allowed in residentially zoned areas, which we've just defined here.
Right.
But that leaves the other SF4, the townhouses and the condos, the fourplexes, the two-family duplexes, the
Mhm.
multifamily zoning.
Yeah. And that's why it's the first draft for y'all to review this.
But right now, what you're telling me is this SF4 is the only place in our ordinances where it's allowed. And
That's
none
right.
of those other places that I
Yeah.
just read off is.
That's right. Yes.
I'd like to make a suggestion. I'd like to get a couple of y'all to review this. We'll table it for right now, but y'all are going to review it and then bring it back to us. In the meantime, we'll make the recommendation about not allowing STRs in SF4. That takes care of both issues so that you're moving on this in case council decides, no, we want to keep them in this SF4. Does that make sense? Would that take care of that conflict that you were talking about?
Mhm.
All right,
It's a lot of hours to review these and come up with suggestions.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
not an afternoon, okay?
no, it's not. I understand
So
that.
do we really want to do that for an issue which may not even exist? I mean, I'm just saying, Brenton probably has spent dozens and dozens of hours on this, and that's probably what it takes. Whoever's going to review it as well. Okay, so, I don't know. Now, time is not money in public service, I guess, around here, but,
Yeah.
uh,
All right, is anybody willing to take that? To look at the draft?
since I am knowledgeable about having been a property owner and an operator in Wimberley, I feel that if we really have to do that, I mean, I'm probably the better suited person to do it, even though I don't look forward to spending the time on it. But if that's what we want to do, I guess I will have to volunteer.
Well, what was the counter towards doing it sequentially? So, step number one could be, let's decide first let's hear back from Bud. Let's decide first if we need to have short-term rentals in SF4 for any reason. And if we do, then we're obviously going to need to address this and tighten it up into how it applies to SF4 only. And if we don't, then we're done with that.
I have no problem with that.
Is that,
So we're moving to table this now.
so it sounds like we're going to move to table this because we're not completely sure we need to do this. But then we're going to need some feedback from Bud and maybe from city council with regards to changing the ordinance, allowing STRs in SF4.
That's what I'm understanding from y'all. Okay.
Makes sense to me.
So should we try to word the motion? Maybe I should try to word the motion?
Well, okay, first of all, we're going to vote on the motion to table. And
Okay.
then you can make a motion to recommend,
Okay.
okay? So I'm going to call the question. This is a motion to table the draft process on the short-term rentals. It was moved by Mr. Palm and seconded by, was it Chris? Did you?
I second.
All right.
Vice Chair John,
Aye.
Commissioner Sonia,
Aye.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Bledsoe,
Yes.
and Commissioner Pop.
Yes.
Okay. Should we go ahead and finish the agenda before we do the motion to recommend?
No,
No, you would have to do this under this agenda item.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion to recommend the STRs and SF4 being removed?
that's part of it. The other part of it would be to have the city attorney in front of us to explain his views and be available for questioning.
Yeah,
Okay.
we need to know the implications of removing STRs in SF4.
Okay. So is there a motion? Can somebody word that for me?
You want to give it a try?
It's more of a request for information, but the motion is to make a request of city council and the city attorney to provide us information as to the need for having STRs in SF4.
And to recommend to city council that they initiate the process of changing the ordinance for SF4 to not allow for short-term rentals.
Did you get all of that, Maurice? Still working on it. Okay. So you're moving, okay?
And I second.
And
I
I'll
second.
Okay.
Is there any discussion?
Do we want to hear the motion from
Yes, I want to hear
secretary?
what we're, but I wanted to make sure y'all didn't want to discuss.
So the motion is to request of council and the city attorney to provide the need for the STRs in SF4 and to recommend to the council to not allow for short-term rentals.
In the SF4,
In SF4.
Okay.
and that the city attorney be available for questioning in person.
Should we split these into two separate motions? Because I feel like making the move to disallow is kind of hanging on the advice from the city attorney.
Okay, so the motion is to request of the council and the city attorney to provide the need for short-term rentals in SF4.
Yeah, if there's any justification for having short-term rentals in SF4.
Okay. You second that?
Yes.
Commissioner Pom?
Hmm?
We're voting. Commissioner
voting.
Pom?
Oh, yeah, yes,
There's no discussion.
yes.
Commissioner Sonia?
Aye.
Commissioner Bledsoe?
Yes.
Vice Chair John?
Yes.
And Commissioner Davenport?
Yes.
All right. Did that satisfy everybody?
And the other motion, we were separating two different
Yes,
motions, right?
and then the second half of that was going to be a recommendation to discontinue STRs in SF4 pending the results of the first motion.
That's the second motion. A different motion, yeah, second.
Yeah. The first one is to viability of it. The second is to recommend no STRs in SF4. Is that correct?
Clear for me.
Okay.
SF4.
Okay. Commissioner Bledsoe?
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes.
Commissioner Pom?
Yes.
Commissioner Sonia?
Well, because I would much prefer to make this vote to move forward after hearing from the city attorney am I able to abstain at this point? Brenton? No, so then I guess I'll vote nay.
Nay. And Vice Chair Jones.
Yes. Okay. Moving on to the next one. Next item is discuss and take appropriate action on recommendation to Woodcreek City Council regarding parking requirements as stated in Title 15 Land Usage, Chapter 156, zoning sections 156.028 hard surface driveways, 156.029 parking, 156.036 parking and load requirements, 156.056 carports and garages, 156.059 parking, and 156.063 Chart 2 residential zoning requirements. And that was a lot of numbers. Okay.
Okay, basically, the city council took care of Schedule 4 city parking about the requirement to have the permit. You still have to have the 7 days in a 30-day cycle. And so that's all been addressed. But it's more now in everything to do with zoning, the 156 numbers.
Okay. Were they saying that it was ambiguous? Is that?
Now, what it is that we've had several builders state that the two, that we require a certain size garage. Well, it's 20 by 20, a single family one.
Uh-huh.
And then we also require 3 hard surface parking spaces on the property. And the builder's argument are, why can't the 2 parking spaces in the garage count as 2 spaces and then you only have 1 outside? Now, in the past, this body and the council thought, well, 90% of our citizens actually use their garage for storage.
That's right. Because there's no cars in there.
That's right.
I want to cause a divorce in my family asking us to use both of them for parking.
But you know, you go out through all the way through the community, and a lot of people drive things that are too big to fit in the garage anyway.
Yeah.
But the previous P and Z and council members looked at it saying, well, we want to get these vehicles off the streets.
Correct.
But now we have citizens and builders saying, well, that is too restrictive because we do have 3 hard surface parking spaces. Because we got the 2 in the garage and the 1 on the drive, what we can get away with. So basically, it'd be losing 2 parking spaces.
Well, let's give them 5. Well, they have to have 5 and 2 of them can be in the garage.
That'd be a great recommendation.
But this, I mean, this would just be for new, who would this apply to? I mean, all the houses are built for the most part.
Right, and we still have over 100 building lots in town. So, and basically it'd be everyone. Now, somebody could come in and say, I want to add a garage. So, they can make changes to their property. And so as long as they did not exceed the impervious cover, they might say, well, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to only have 1 parking space to increase my decrease my impervious cover.
So that I can then build something else.
So I can build, yeah, right. Or look, I've decreased it by this much, so I want to put a deck on the backside of my house.
Right.
And I've decreased my impervious cover even though I've changed my parking scheme. So there's a lot of ways to work this around, but, and we have a lot of the builders in town, which is that they don't like the 3 hard surface parking spaces on the outside. And as you say, because when it says hard surface, they put in the concrete runners and the rock in between.
Yeah.
Because you still have that hard surface to park on and it's still a 10 by 20 area. And so they basically technically meet the requirements, but that means they can push up the amount of square footage for the home. But then the property owners, whoever buys the home, does not realize that they're sitting at 29.97%. And then they want to put a deck on. And then they can come in and apply and say, look, I'm going to decrease my impervious cover by this amount, 3%. I don't know what it would be. by taking out these, because you only require 3 hard surface parking spaces, and the garage counts as 2.
But that's not how the current ordinance reads, right?
Our current ordinance says you have to have a certain size garage, depends on what zoning district you're in. So in a single family one, you have to have a 20 by 20 garage and 3 hard surface parking spaces that would equal out to basically 600 square feet. And when you go through the community too, especially on Champion Circle, you'll see where they have the driveway side by side, and then they have one that's shot off to the side, which basically is, inaccessible unless you have a certain size vehicle, but they still meet the requirements.
So PNC should reaffirm that the existing ordinance will continue in place.
If that's what P and Z wants, yes.
Okay.
Can I say something, please? So it seems like the actual purpose behind all of this is just to disallow street parking. Is that mostly what we're getting at?
It's trying to make sure that we do, because we do allow parking on the street as long as it's an improved area, either crest granite or even grassland 4 inches tall. But all 4 wheels off the roadway. But it is trying to get as many vehicles off the roadway or our right of way as possible.
Okay, so I guess my whole thinking is that's the purpose of all this. And, I mean, I guess what's the point of mandating how many parking spots a house might have? I mean, if it's one person living there with one vehicle, they don't need a garage plus 3 parking spaces, when really all we're trying to do is get people to not park on the street, right? Like, that seems like that should be more of the focus than actually mandating this is what you have to do, within the bounds of your own property.
Yes, but if you have a 2-car garage and then a driveway that's big enough to accommodate at least 3 parking spaces, you're probably more inclined to park in your driveway than you are in your yard right next to the street. So, yeah, and then to get back to Brenton's point, I mean, I can totally see people turning that around to build bigger houses or bigger decks or swimming pools or something like that. I don't know.
But why are we concerned if people have decks or whatnot versus a place
No,
to park?
we're not. I think I think, as you stated, we're concerned about cars parked essentially in people's lawns, but
Mhm.
but off the roadway.
Yeah.
Well, the roads are so narrow, we can't park cars on the road. I mean, and then traffic get around them.
Right, yeah, no, and I'm totally in favor of all that. I'm just saying, should we be focusing our efforts more on alleviating any potential issues by people parking on the road, very much adjacent to the road, as opposed to being overly consumed by how many parking spots they have in their garage versus their driveway or whatnot? Like, are we looking at this in a,
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is, what if we were to focus our efforts on, hey man, let's do something that says that people can't park in their driveways right next to the road?
sure, or, just in their lawns, for example, like focus more on what the outcome is that we want to see, as opposed to like mandating what we believe in all of our wisdom to be the solution to alleviating those unintended outcomes.
I think the current ordinance is just fine, honestly, with the double garage and 3 parking spaces. But I do have a question or two for Brenton. In the 059 parking section here, you're talking about 3 off-street parking areas. Again, most of the older homes have 2 parking areas currently. So this is for new construction, the 3 parking areas.
I would say any home built after 2000 probably has 3 hard surface parking spaces.
Yeah, mine is built in 1970, so I have 2. So my question really is, you have an old existing home,
Mhm.
and you want to make an addition to it. You may want to put in a storage shed, you may want to put in a decking, whatever. Does that automatically mean that property owners will have to generate a 3rd parking space?
We would be looking at it that they do not exceed the 30% impervious cover.
So that's the thing. So an addition to an existing home, as long as it meets the impervious coverage thing, can still maintain two parking
The two
spaces.
parking spaces, yes.
And maybe that should be clarified here. I don't know if you have to have this amount of detail, but it would maybe be good to say under 156.059A, that does not apply to additions to existing homes, provided the impervious coverage ratio is upheld. Just for clarification purposes. And the other question, Brenton, is what is the definition of a hard surface?
Oh. And then I'll have to go back to the zoning code for not the hard surface, just a second here.
I mean, most people's mind, it's concrete or asphalt, but I think we're talking about this crushed granite. Maybe.
Well, and that's where, let's see here, because I have to go to the impervious cover ordinance, chapter 50.
Well, since new construction, they're doing, the semi-pervious cover in
Right.
between.
Mhm.
So that does help them with the impervious cover.
It does. And basically it says hard surface. Well, the way it's designed is that you have the hard surface with the concrete to park on and within that 10 by 20 area. And then where basically between the wheels, then you have the pervious area. So they still have the 10 by 20 hard surface, but they're parking on the hard surface. And the rocks and things like that, the river rocks, that's why they're putting them in there, because that is semi-hard. Or we have one area in town, a gentleman just built a home just a few months ago, that his whole parking area is crushed granite because it is a hard surface that is pervious.
Yeah, in B, it says gravel or crushed granite is pervious cover.
It is pervious.
So how about if you have a driveway, which older homes sometimes have, that, where you not have the car tires go, but in between, it's grass, okay, which looks a lot better than gravel.
Sure.
But that's not a hard surface, so
Right.
that would not be allowed.
Right.
I see some ambiguity here.
Mhm. Mhm.
The other thing that I saw on this one is in 156.059, you have each dwelling unit shall have a hard surface driveway providing a minimum of 3 off-street parking areas, each measuring, okay.
Yeah.
So then in B, it shall be unlawful for anyone to store vehicles not in operating condition in open view for more than 7 days. Such vehicles must be stored completely enclosed buildings or removed to an authorized storage area.
Mhm.
And this I find redundant, since streets are narrow and provide limited parking area, residential off-street parking requirements are essential. Each dwelling unit shall have a hard surface driveway providing a minimum of 3 off-street parking areas, each area measuring 10 feet by 20 feet. Why do we have that in there twice? I'm
I don't
just
know.
curious.
If you notice, the last time this was amended was 3/13/2019.
Okay. Well, when did we go to a minimum of 3 off-street parking areas? Do you remember? Was that in 19?
No, it was probably in 05.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look, but because I don't remember that it was actually, it was already required.
Okay.
And it is true that some homes may be only needing 1 parking space, but a house, is going to have sequential number of owners over its lifetime. And if you have 2 working parents and a teenager or 2, you're going to have, 3 or 4 cars. I mean, I think it's, and the garage is, my garage is storage. And so I know exactly where it comes from. So I think the existing ordinance is just fine.
All right. Do we have a motion on the floor? We're just discussing.
No, just discussion.
Okay. All right, does somebody want to make a motion as to whether or not we're going to keep the ordinance as it is, or,
Okay, I can try.
and then we'll let it go up or down?
I make a motion that we recommend that the existing ordinance stay in place with the clarification that the 3 off-street parking areas only applies to new construction, provided that any addition to existing structures still meet the impervious coverage requirement.
But for clarification, when we're talking about the 3 off street, at this point, are we including the garage or is it in addition to the garage?
No, it's in addition to the garage.
Okay.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, any further discussion?
I have a question. Why 3? It seems like an odd number. It's just a. Does
Yeah,
anyone
why
know?
not 2?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know, the previous P and Z said 3.
Okay.
I guess I'd just like to say again, I think it would be more diligent for us to focus on the outcomes that we're looking for as opposed to mandating the methods. If that makes sense. You know, if the outcome we're trying to do is get cars further off the road for public safety, for example, then, you know, we should recommend an ordinance that says you can't park within whatever 3 feet of the road. You know, I think, again, we should just be focused more on outcomes than methods.
Well, if you have a garage and 3 parking spaces, that's basically saying a normal family is going to be able to park all their vehicles off the road. So I think we accomplished that.
Yes, it does, but it's by mandating the methods that we accomplish the outcomes.
And it can be a hard surface. You can do a regular driveway. You can do the strips. You can do just a large gravel area. Those are basically your options.
No, I understand. I'm just kind of as a point of an approach to public policy, we should be more focused on the outcomes that we're looking for as opposed to the methods that we, in all of our wisdom, believe will achieve said outcomes. You know, it's just more about the public safety and the public interest than being able to park 5 cars at your house.
Well, but I think that the along the street parking, which is, I think, part of an easement, isn't it, or something? I mean, is it a property owner who owns that 10 feet?
No,
Wait.
the city basically all the way through the city has a 50-foot rights of way.
Right, so 10 feet.
And that's why we say that you can actually park on 10 foot of it.
Right.
Then when you get inside of that 10 foot, then there's a PUE area that's 5 foot.
Right.
But this previously, and we still do, we allow someone to improve that area so they can put a car there, but have all their tires off the road.
And that's the area, but I think myself for sure, and I think most people who live here, consider that more like guest parking. You have friends over, they park along the street. And so I've never considered that area being like permanent parking, which is, I think, maybe what you're alluding to, that why have three parking spaces off street if we have 3 parking spaces along the street. And I think my answer to that is that is for guest parking primarily, and not for year-round 24/7 parking by the residents.
Well, I drive past the truck that's parked right on the side of the road, like pretty much every day. And, you know, it squeezes in, I have to kind of squeeze in between the truck and the tree in the middle of the road. Right. So I mean,
What?
you know, yeah. And again, I mean, yeah, if you have 2 working parents and 2 teenagers, that's one thing. If you have 2 working parents and 7 teenagers, then, you know, I mean, again, then that 5 spots might not be enough, but, you know, so long as people are not endangering citizenry and following their own, you know, following the code of being on hardcover or whatever, seems more important than.
I guess we have to
mandating
agree
random
to
numbers.
disagree here.
Well, I think in the Schedule 4, it does say that, parking of vehicles, although the tires have to be off the road.
Yeah.
And so it is doing that, and there is a penalty for it. Any person violating any provision of this schedule shall be subject to the penalties and provisions in 10.99 of the Code of Ordinances. So there is a penalty for not parking, but who enforces that?
Good question.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So it's not in the traffic code. I have to go back and look, but so the traffic code can be enforced by the constable and the sheriff's department. The ordinance would be enforced by city staff. And of course, we're not out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's all complaint driven. And what I think the biggest concern is when we have emergency vehicles come down a street. And Aurora and I always talk about our street, and well, Chris is too, that it is very narrow.
It is.
And if you have vehicles parked on both sides and they're not off the roadway, you're not going to get an emergency vehicle through there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same thing in our neighborhood.
And you also have children, playing them in front yard. If you have 3 cars parked along the street there and they are playing in the front yard, they may run out, not see the cars coming. So
That's
there's a
right.
safety issue involved as well. So we have a motion which has been seconded. I think we should
Do you want to call the question?
Stop the conversation and vote.
All right. I have a motion. I have a suggestion to call the question. So let's call the question.
Commissioner Bledsoe,
Yes.
Commissioner Palm,
Yes.
Vice Chair John,
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Stonier.
Aye.
The motion was to continue
To
enforcing.
recommend to the city council that the existence ordinance stay in place. Free off-street parking applies to new construction only.
Right.
Okay. Any other items?
I have a quick cleaning up question about the backside. Percentage masonry required.
That has to be changed.
Yeah, that's deleted. Yeah.
It does. That's one of the things that's in the code. Has never been changed. We know that it basically is against state law.
It's
But
unenforceable.
and that's what will be one of the things that has to be discussed on how to get rid of that without having to go through the complete hearing process.
Okay. All right. There's nothing else. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. 5:07.